An election there will be. That's Government House Leader Steve McKinnon saying he's worried about support for the upcoming federal budget while criticizing some opposition parties for dismissing the budget before seeing it. He also called budget demands from the Conservatives, quote, ludicrous. Opposition parties contend, though, the minister is flipping the script and that the onus is instead on the government to secure support, not the other way around. Could Canadians really be headed to the polls sometime soon? Let's bring in our front bench. Louis Hammond was a senior advisor to Industry Minister François-Philippe Champagne. A warm welcome to the panel tonight, Louis. Larissa Weller is the founder of Henley Strategy. She's a former head of communications for Ontario's Conservative Premier, Doug Ford. Kathleen Monk is former director of communications to the late Jack Layton. She's now the principal owner of Monk and Associates. And Laura Stone rounds us out tonight. She's a Queen's Park reporter for the Globe and Mail. Hi, everybody. Happy Tuesday. Happy almost election, I guess. I'm joking. Laura, I'll start with you. I thought it was a very interesting comment from the minister from a political perspective, because it's a lot of sort of pre-budget political positioning, very much an effort to put the onus on the opposition moving forward, which I thought was, certainly something that stood out to me. What do you think he was trying to do there?
Well, it strikes me that he says he's worried, but he's not really worried, because I think if you look at where the Liberal government is sitting right now in relation to the opposition, they're looking pretty good if an election were to be called. Look, I don't think that the government does want one, because I don't think the public wants one, right? We can't have elections every 6 months in this country. But I think the Liberals are positioning themselselves as the party that is probably the most ready and the most likely to benefit from an election right now. If you look at the NDP are leaderless, they're going through a leadership vote at some point. The Conservatives are sort of struggling to punch through. We have controversies with Pierre Poilievre attacking the National Police Force, essentially, and the Bloc Québécois kind of doing its thing in Quebec. And so I do think that kind of strikes me as the Liberals positioning themselves from as in a position of power here to kind of play chicken with the opposition. And if, oops, we end up kind of accidentally falling into an election campaign, maybe that would be to the benefit of Mark Carney's government.
Kathleen, what do you think the positioning is all about at this point? So we're just over 2 weeks away from the tabling of the budget.
Yeah, well, Laura just stole my line, because honestly, I love a good game of election chicken stare-off, and that's exactly what's happening. And it really shows the difference between someone like a Karina Gould, who used to be the House leader, to compare her to like Steve McKinnon, who is distinctly much more political and kind of carries that kind of political shiv with him everywhere he goes. Much more cut of the same kind of cloth as Dominic LeBlanc when he held that role. I mean, this is really typical. This game is played in the lead up to every federal budget, opposition parties saying we're going to vote against before even seeing the budget, and then the government coming in saying that's ridiculous, that's reactionary, you should be more responsible to Canadians. But it's going to play out the way it is. The only mild correction I'd make to Laura's excellent analysis is that yes, I think the Liberals do stand to do well. I do think that Conservatives are a little bit on the back heel, and potentially the Bloc too, only because of the threat. They're going in, the province of Quebec is going into a provincial election next year. I actually would say with the New Democrats, and this is the correction, Laura, is just that, honestly, we got nothing left to lose. Like, bring on the election. We might not be able to have the money to run a big campaign, but truthfully, honestly, we have nowhere to go but up. We've already lost party status. And in fact, because of the opening that Prime Minister Carney has made by shifting so much to the right, he's opened up this massive left flank that actually, in terms of the ground game and the historical nature of the strength in some of the provinces of New Democrats, we could actually maybe even pick up a few seats. So, not saying that I want an election either. I think it's a waste of money, and Canadians want us to get to work on the job that they hired us to do, which is making life more affordable. But yeah, I think 7, we could only go higher from here.
Look, okay, I take the point. I would ask, though, on the, Larissa, on the sort of opening that might exist, sort of bridging what Kathleen's saying with the budget talk. Do you think that will be the case come the budget? And I ask because of the relative positioning of both the Conservatives of the Bloc. Like you heard from the minister, the Bloc was the first out of the gate after saying initially at the election that they intended to support they'd give them a year, that actually they've seen nothing to be able to support the budget. And that was at a time where the narrative around the budget as it is a bit today, was very confusing. You had austerity and investment at the same time that the Prime Minister was talking about. Then you have the Conservatives laying out a list of demands, which we know there is, particularly where the size of the deficit is, that they want it to be no greater, I think, than $42 billion. Like, that's not going to happen. So that leaves the NDP. And does that mean something different for the budget than maybe the rhetoric around the Carney government would lead us to believe?
Yeah, so like leading into the budget, we heard the Prime Minister say both that it was going to be an austerity budget, he said it in French, and that he said once it's going to have generational investment. And when he said that, my ears sort of perked up and I thought, God, that sounds expensive. And I love Kathleen, but I disagree that the NDP has nowhere to go. Ask Kim Campbell. 7 seats would look pretty good for Kim Campbell. I don't think the NDP can afford an election. The Conservatives certainly can. I mean, that's the one marker that the Conservatives always outperform the Liberals. They always raise more money, and that's the number one kind of, are we ready to go? We're organized and we raise money. So the Conservatives could go to an election. The House leader was saying, you know, the opposition's not reading the room. They're not reading the mood of the people. I think he's not reading the room. If he's going to start throwing this out there, you know, we've had, I think, 5 provincial elections in the last year. We had some major cities have elections. Quebec's going to election next year. Canadians are tired. They want stability. Mark Carney promised stability. He promised he was going to take on Donald Trump. He promised our economic indicators were going to, you know, get better and turn the tide. He hasn't delivered on those things. I think he's got a massive task in front of him with this budget to deliver on the things he promised Canadians he was going to deliver on. Food prices are up, rent is up, right. Inflation is up, and he's got a lot to tackle in this budget. And I agree, I don't know if it's going to be a spending or austerity budget, but he needs the NDP support.
Louis, how do you think this is going to play out?
Well, I've got some breaking news from your viewers, Vashi, and that there will be no election this fall over the budget. I mean, let's be serious here. If you take a step back, though, I think the more important question that we need to look at, or at least the Liberals have to look at, is as to whether they're able to leverage this budget to sort of get a better hold of the general political narrative right now in Ottawa, because we know over the last 6 months that narrative has not been very positive for them. You know, we were promised big things, and they seem to be under-delivering, especially on the U.S. file. Mark Carney said he would stand up to Donald Trump. There would be no tariffs, and this would be wrapped up in a couple of weeks. That has not happened. So I think there's an opportunity here for the Liberals to be able to leverage this budget, and maybe, who knows, there are rumors now that there may be a deal on aluminum, steel, and energy with the United States. You could maybe, you know, combine that into a 1-2 punch, where you've got that deal that's being announced maybe around the APEC in South Korea next week, and then maybe a couple of days or a week later, you've got the budget, where you're able to sort of grab Canadians' attention once again and really sort of provide them with that forward-looking vision to get a handle again on the general narrative, because they don't seem to have a strong handle on that right now.
I want to follow up with you, because often when I would be dealing with you in your old capacity working for the government, it was on the Minister of Industry, right? So you've got a lot of experience on the Stellantis file. I just want to play a clip from question period between the Leader of the Opposition and the new Minister of Industry, Melanie Joly, and then we'll talk around about that.
I met this morning with the Canadian CEO of GM. I was in conversation with the head of the labor union of Unifor, and I also talked to Doug Ford, and I talked to Vic Fideli. We will make sure that we fight for these jobs.
She talked to this person, and she talked to that person, and she talked to this other person, and she talked, and she talked, and they talk, and they talk, and nothing gets done, Mr. Speaker. Canadians are tired of talk. They want their job.
So I just have a few minutes to get everyone in, but I do want to talk to all of you. Louis, what are your thoughts on how the sort of Stellantis decision and now GM, I know they're not perfectly analogous, but like how big of a challenge is this?
This is crazy, Vashi. I mean, just think back about 18 months, maybe 2 years ago, we were so high on the auto industry in this country, we were literally like going for the fence. Less than 2 years later, the wheels seem to be coming off the cart, and excuse the pun here. I think Pierre Poilievre, and I hate to say this, but I think Pierre Poilievre's got a point there. And, you know, the Carney brand is action, it's focus, it's right now, it's let's get things done. And you've got the industry minister saying that she talked to one person, talked to another, and whatnot. This is going to be very, very tough. You know, the auto industry is going through a crisis moment. Obviously, we've heard about this potential deal with the United States, which does not include the auto industry, by the way. And when Melanie Joly talks about having, these contractual obligations with these companies whereby they need to guarantee, or they took undertakings to guarantee a certain number of jobs in Canada, that's all well and good. But you know how these things work. The company bails, goes to the United States, people lose their jobs, and then you go to court over the obligations and the contracts, and that can take for years. And so politically speaking, it's very, very difficult to see the upside on this when the industry is going through a crisis, particularly in Ontario, but also here in Quebec.
Larissa, what do you think about that?
I agree. And I actually thought the same. When I saw the minister's scrum earlier with reporters and then her performance and question period, her answer was, I talked to this guy, I talked to that guy. Nothing's getting done. And, I saw Lisa Raitt on the show yesterday, and she said something that really stuck with me, and that was that Donald Trump doesn't want any car made in Canada. Any car that's sold to Americans, he doesn't want any part of it made in Canada. And when Stellantis made their announcement last week, I actually watched the U.S. news of the Stellantis CEO celebrating that investment in the States. And he said a really also glaring thing. He said, our number one priority is the United States. That's her number one market. This is the biggest investment they've ever made in the U.S. And that's not going to change. And once that investment goes there, it's not coming back. And I think this is just the tip of the iceberg for our auto industry. And, frankly, the government's going to be scrambling here because I don't know what they're going to do.
Kathleen?
The story is far from written. The company still has many different ways to be squeezed, whether it comes from the Minister of Industry or not through her suit. I think, sure, maybe that's unlikely. There's still consumer power, which I can talk about it ad nauseum. But actually what I want to focus on is the one card that the government still has to play. And they can just open up Canadian manufacturing plants and the footprint that exists to Chinese manufacturers. It either is going to be cars made in the States or cars made in China. So what happens if they just say, okay, we're going to reverse our mandate on Chinese-made EVs, convince them to actually make them in Canada, and then those Canadian workers just slide on over to making those Chinese EVs, but in Canada, made by Canadian workers. I mean, the company still is going to be squeezed. And I remind you that it was just a bit more than 15 years ago, that every Canadian in Canada held a GoFundMe campaign for Chrysler, Stellantis now called, and gave them $100 out of their own jeans to basically say, hey, we want you to get through this financial crisis. We want to give you a leg up. And so them turning their back on Canada now and moving, as apparently GM is as well today, the news from today, Canadians know that if you want to sell here, you've got to make here. And that means you can't just turn your back on the workers. And if that void is going to be filled by China or some other manufacturer, well, Canadians can vote with their wallet.
Well, if you think we've got it bad with Donald Trump right now, just wait until we start, importing Chinese EVs in Canada. I mean, we
not
see
importing,
nothing.
Louis, not importing, making them here.
Well, both would be very complex. Last word to you, Laura. Yeah. Sorry, I got about 30 seconds. My apologies.
Well, look, I mean, at this stage, outrage is sort of the only card that the governments have to play. And while, Melanie Joly may be criticized for, saying that she's talked to the head of these car companies, that's essentially what Doug Ford is saying as well in Ontario. And he's a progressive conservative premier, right? I mean, they're all kind of trying to talk tough, threaten to sue, say they're going to fight for jobs. And that's really kind of the only line that these governments have, and they probably do have some sort of legal recourse at some stage, but that could be very time consuming. And so I think that does put more pressure on the Carney government to strike these deals with the Trump administration on steel and aluminum, energy, and eventually, hopefully, auto. But I mean, I think this is sort of the greatest challenge for the government, both provincial and federal, in dealing with the auto industry and a U.S. administration that wants to decimate our auto industry here in Canada.
I've got to leave it on that note. Thanks, everybody. Really appreciate the discussion. Our front bench, Louis Hammond, Larissa Waller, Kathleen Monk, and Laura Stone.